2 weeks ago, 3 people went on trial in Ohio for protesting during a Cleveland Indians baseball game. Our very own Michael Christian was there and has prepared this background report on the case.
This case was all about a condition of institutionalized racism within America's favorite pastime.
In recent years, the Cleveland Indians have become one of the most successful teams in Major League Baseball. But some Native Americans, concerned about the club's name and mascot, have regularly protested during Indian games. Last October, during the World Series, protesters took the Indian symbol, Chief Wahoo, and burned it in effigy. That demonstration led to the arrest of 3 Native Americans on charges ranging from criminal trespass to criminal endangering.
The defendants clearly were going to do whatever they wanted to do up until the point where they forced the police to make an arrest, and that's exactly what happened in this case.
The defense argues that the protesters' actions were a constitutionally protected form of free speech, justified by their opposition to a team name and mascot they find morally repugnant.
On October 23rd, 1997, 3 Native American people, Juan Reyna, Vernon Bellecourt, and Juanita Halfray, took a bold stand against what they felt to be was an unjust and racially motivated symbol that degrades and demeans their people, and that is the Chief Wahoo.
Vernon Bellecourt, the man who allegedly started the fire, says the charges against the demonstrators are an attempt to stifle freedom of expression.
I believe that the evidence will show that I am not guilty of those charges. Rather, it's a smokescreen to try to criminalize legitimate protest in order to silence protest.
But the city of Cleveland insists this is not a case about free speech, merely the trial of 3 individuals who broke the law.
Those are the only people that are on trial here today. Those are the issues that we're here to decide. Those are the only issues that we are here to decide. We will not be passing judgment on anything else, including Chief Wahoo or any other such items.
Well, this is definitely an interesting trial, and because it has lots of nuances of meaning, we've invited 2 very special guests, members of the Court TV family. First, Natasha Lapiner-Giresi, who is a legal aid lawyer who is also on leave, and also a world-class culinary expert, who has been with us before. And also, to my far left, Stephen Munisteri, who travels up from Texas whenever we have a case that's too deep for everybody else to fathom. He's done civil and criminal law and has dealt in a number of cases that involve questions of whether an arrest is proper or not and how private companies that use police officers can function. And in fact, Stephen, let me start with you. There are a number of sort of subsidiary issues. The ultimate issue for the defendants here is the substantive question of the use of the name Cleveland Indians by the Cleveland organization. Interestingly enough, I know 2 colleges, St. John's, which abandoned the use of red men, and Stanford, which abandoned the use of Indians in face of this kind of protest. But really, the underlying issue here is whether their arrests and the charges for which they were brought into custody are correct. And so while the defendants want to really try the substantive question of whether they should be prevented from protesting the use of the name, the state is saying, look, the real issue here is whether we have the right to arrest you and charge you with resisting arrest and trespass.
Raymond, you know, there's a very famous Supreme Court case that says you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. So if I was the prosecution, I would say you don't have the right to start a fire in trying to have free speech. I mean, you have an absolute right to go out and protest. You can, if it's in a public area, you can burn an American flag. But there are limits to that. So the question is, did they exceed those limits? Have they done something beyond free speech that then moves it over into a criminal violation?
Now, Natasha, this is in municipal court, but there's a jury. You're the trial judge. You know that the defendants really want the First Amendment question, whether they have the right to protest, and even to some extent the substantive question of whether the Cleveland Ball Club should use the name. How concerned are you that that issue should or shouldn't get to the jury? I mean, do you kind of let it all go in and let everybody wrestle with it, or do you try to restrict, as the state would undoubtedly like, the issue to whether they should have been where they were at the moment they were arrested?
Well, I think you hear a lot of commentary about how judges control their courtroom, and I think that a judge would have to try and keep it narrow. That is the municipal court in this case is, were they resisting arrest? Were they trespassing? Had they done something illegal? Not the larger constitutional issue about about protesting, not the larger issue about whether or not the Indians should use the name. So I think the judge has to sort of walk a fine line how much to let in.
On the other hand, we do know that the voir dire process, including Mr. Bellecourt, who was his own lawyer, who was pro se, as we call it, there was extensive questioning of potential jurors about their response to the underlying issues. So that would suggest that the court expects that jurors are going to have to at least be very cognizant of what was the protest about.
Right.
Stephen, any possibility that jurors might get drawn into the fight over whether the protest was right or whether the issues about which the protest was focused was right?
Everybody's human. You have your own natural opinions about things. But if I was the defense, what I'd like to do is shift the focus to your right just to have free speech and get it away from the criminal issues and appeal to people's American patriotism and saying, you know, all we're talking about here is having some protesters who, whether you agree or disagree with their particular issue, we all can agree that they should have the right to express that. If I was the prosecution, I'd try to move it away and say this has nothing to do with free speech. This has to do with whether somebody broke a law and went beyond having free speech. You can burn an American flag, but you can't stick a burning American flag next to a gas tank.
Okay. Well, now that we've drawn the issues, let's take a quick break and come back and listen to the trial. Welcome back to Court TV. My name is Raymond Brown, and we're bringing you a trial that involves some events that took place at Cleveland Stadium in Cleveland, Ohio last October. Involves a group of Native Americans who are protesting against the use by the Cleveland Baseball Club of the term Indians, and as well as their mascot, Chief Wahoo. Right now, we're about to show you the opening statement of the prosecutor. Remember, the charge is, in one case, resisting arrest, in other, criminal trespass. Let's listen to the opening statement.
What I'd like to do, to begin with, is tell you why we're here. We are here for the trial of Juan Reyna, Juanita Helfrey, and Vernon Bellecourt. Juan Reyna and Juanita Helfrey, as you have heard, are each charged with a count of criminal trespass and also one of aggravated disorderly conduct. Mr. Bellecourt, who you've heard from already today, has been charged with the crimes of resisting arrest and criminal damaging. Those are the only people that are on trial here today. Those are the issues that we're here to decide. Those are the only issues that we are here to decide. We will not be passing judgment on anything else, including Chief Wahoo or any other such items. Okay? Having stated that, let me first tell you what you are not going to hear today. You are not going to hear any prosecution witnesses who are going to tell you that these individuals were not offended or do not continue to be offended by Chief Wahoo or by the Cleveland Indians and the name that they have chosen for their organization. Furthermore, you will not hear any prosecution witness tell you that they don't have a right to their opinions. And you will not hear any prosecution witness tell you that they don't have a right to express their opinions. Furthermore, you will not hear any prosecution witness who will tell you that they support racism or that they support discrimination. Having said that, and realizing that those are not the issues that we are here to resolve today, let me explain to you what it was that happened on October 23rd, 1997, which caused all these people to gather here in this courtroom today. What happened on that date is that an organization or a group of people, including those three defendants that you see seated at the trial table, planned to have a demonstration, a protest at the Jacobs Field area where the World Series was going on. This was Game 5 of the World Series, if I'm not mistaken. It was the last home game that was going to take place during the World Series. It may have been Game 6. I'm not sure of that. They have been protesting at Jacobs Field in the past. In fact, the officers that are going to testify will tell you that they're very familiar with all the individuals that you see over at the trial table. They have dealt with them. They have working agreements working with them. They know them by face. They know them by name. Okay? When they chose to protest on this particular evening, they gathered at the stadium before game time, as the crowds were starting to file in. Okay, and as you can imagine, it's a World Series game. We're going to have a very large crowd. Over 40,000 people are going to be gathering at Jacobs Field for the purpose of watching a World Series game, rooting on the Indians, hoping to see a victory. When they first gathered at the stadium, they gathered in this basic area. And what you'll see here is this is just a basic map of this whole gateway complex, with the stadium being situated right here, Gund Arena up here, for those of you who are not familiar with the area. When the protesters first gathered, they gathered in this area over here. For those of you who are familiar with the Jacobs Field area, this is where the Bob Feller statue is located. For those of you who are not familiar with the Jacobs Field area, the Bob Feller statue is situated directly in front of one of the entrances, one of the main entrances into the stadium, where a large number of these 40,000 people are going to be coming through in order to get into the stadium. Now, as you'll hear from these officers once again, just as there's protesters and there's citizens going to the game coming into the stadium, we're also going to have officers there to provide security, to make sure that everything goes smoothly, not just as relates to the demonstrators, but just in general. And you'll hear from three officers specifically, including Sergeant Gonzalez, who you've met already, and also Sergeant McKay and an Officer Miller from the Cleveland Police Department. And the way that they would organize themselves that night was that Sergeant Gonzalez, who's sort of the lead officer, and he'll explain exactly what his role is, but in his role as the lead officer, he had one team, one group of the officers who were there. Sergeant McKay was acting as sort of the group leader of the other group. Sergeant McKay and her group were the ones that were present over in this area near the Bob Feller statue. Now, Sergeant McKay saw that this group was gathering, that this crowd was gathering near the Bob Feller statue. Her first reaction was to suggest to them that they needed to move to a different area, and this is the area, I don't think this is the proper term for it, but Sergeant Gonzalez has referred to it as the grassy knoll area. This is the area up just off to the north of the Bob Feller statue, which is a grassy area. And once again, for those of you familiar with Jacobs Field, it would be the area between where the Bob Feller statue and Pete and Dewey's lies. Okay. The reason why Sergeant McKay had suggested that they go to this area is because that's the area that they are permitted to protest in. And when I say permitted to protest in, it's not just permitted by Sergeant Gonzalez and Sergeant McKay. It's permitted by court order, by federal court order. And you'll hear exactly about that as we go along with the testimony during the trial. Additionally, it's important to note that these individuals had been granted by court order the right to protest in this area at Jacobs Field 4 times per month. It's worth noting that this was the 9th time that month that they had protested at Jacobs Field. Okay, and once again, this is not an order that Sergeant Gonzalez issued. This is not an order that Sergeant McKay issued. This is an order issued by a federal court. Furthermore, continuing, this was the 9th time that they were gathered in this area. But still, Sergeant Gonzalez, his officers, and all the other security personnel at Jacobs Field was not going to make an attempt to move them off of the area. In fact, as you'll hear from the testimony that is presented from this witness stand, they provided almost a security-type agreement for these protesters. They acted by standing outside near where they were protesting, by standing between the protesters and the people who are coming into the stadium as a security personnel even for the protesters themselves. And what you'll also learn is not only do the Cleveland police officers act in this regard during baseball games, but the city of Cleveland and Jacobs Field has arranged for a group of private citizens who call themselves the Peacekeepers to act as almost a human fence, whose purpose is to stand between the protesters and those individuals coming into the stadium who might otherwise conflict with the protesters, to sort of act as a barrier between them. Not a physical barrier so much, but just enough to sort of keep the two parties separated. So clearly, once again, these protesters are not being removed. They are not being told they can't stay there. They are being accommodated. They are being accommodated. They are being allowed to deliver their message in any way they see fit at this point. Now, as these protesters are delivering their message, which, by the way, includes the display of a sign which has some profane and certainly offensive names of their own listed on the sign, and you've already heard some of the names that we're going to hear as this goes along and some of the language. I myself won't use them because I don't believe in them, but you will hear some of these names and some of this language. Not only are they putting up a sign which has this kind of language, but one individual has a stereo equipment, almost like an amplifier, so that he can speak into it and pass his message along. And his message includes some of this same profane language. Mind you, this is all taking place as a crowd of 40,000 people is filing in to Jacobs Field for the World Series game, including men, women, and children. Okay? As they're going along, once again, the officers aren't interfering with the message, but as time goes by, one of the security personnel at Jacobs Field, a gentleman by the name of Ty Greathouse, who you'll hear from later, probably on Monday, he noticed that Mr. Bellecourt had what appeared to be about a can of lighter fluid in his hands. And they also noticed that there was an effigy, a term we've already had defined for us, but almost like a paper mock-up of Chief Wahoo hanging from a tree. Mr. Greathouse watched as Vernon Bellecourt doused this paper mock-up of Chief Wahoo with this lighter fluid. And once Ty Greathouse saw that Mr. Bellecourt was going to light it and watched as he did light it, that was the first time that anybody interfered with this protest.
We'll hear more of the prosecution's opening right after this break. Today we're in a municipal court in Cleveland watching a trial that involves two Native Americans who were arrested outside the Cleveland ballpark. They were arrested because they object to the use of the name Indians for the Cleveland baseball team and also the use of the mascot. Right now we're listening to the prosecutor's opening in this case, in which the two men are charged respectively with criminal trespass and resisting arrest.
This protest. Now, something else that's important to note is this area over here was not just limited to the protesters that day. Okay. In addition, you'll see, not only here, and I should tell you now, there's going to be a videotape of this entire incident. So everything that I'm telling you, you're going to see for yourself. But you'll see on this videotape that not only were the protesters in this same small area, but there was a stand here that had been given permission to be in that area at that time that was being sponsored by Pepsi. And it included a balloon, a helium balloon, and 4 helium tanks, which were needed to keep the balloon afloat. This all happened within just a few feet of where the effigy was lit. So there's a fire here, there's 4 helium canisters all in that same area. Obviously, the police officers, the security personnel needed to react to that. That created a danger to everybody who was in that stadium area that day. They reacted by going over to the area where the effigy had been lit and by attempting to douse the flames, by attempting to put this effigy on the ground and get this fire put out. However, as they attempted to do this, and once again, you'll see this on videotape, Mr. Bellecourt decided that he wasn't going to let him do that. He grabbed a hold of the officer who was trying to get this thing down off of the tree, grabbed him by the arm, grabbed her by the arm actually, and struggled with the officer as they attempted to put out this fire. The officer told Mr. Bellecourt he was under arrest. This did not stop Mr. Bellecourt. He continued to struggle with these officers as they attempted to put out this fire. Finally, they got him under control. And Ty Greathouse, using his head, went over to the sprinkler system and turned that on and managed to get the fire put out. And you'll see people running away from the sprinkler on this videotape as they're trying to avoid what's happening here. At this point, Cleveland police officers, the security personnel at Jacobs Field and in the Gateway complex, they'd had enough. At this point, this was no longer a peaceful protest. This had become a protest that was bringing danger to everybody who was coming along this path. They told the rest of the people involved in this protest, it's time to go. You're over your 4 protests per month limit. You tried to do it in a place other than where you're supposed to do it. You set fire, creating a danger. It's time for you to get off of the property. It's time for you to go. It seemed as though that was going to be the end of it. Everybody went back about their business. Sergeant Gonzalez, as the lead officer, had already come over and was in discussions with the other people. It seemed as though this might be the end of the incident. Just a few moments later, however, word came over the radio that they were starting up again, except this time the protest had moved all the way around the stadium, and I'm not sure how they got to the other side, but I presume they came through Eagle Road, Boulevard Road, or Eagle Avenue, but somehow managed to locate themselves in this Gateway Square area, which is the area located between Jacobs Field and Gund Arena. And some of you may be familiar with it because it has some towers rising up off of the street there, and it's right on the Ontario side of the buildings. They gathered again in this area. Sergeant Gonzalez, as lead officer, knowing that they had already been asked to disperse, that they'd been asked to leave because they had been violating this court order, went to the leaders of this protest and said, it's time for you to go. Let me make it clear, it's time for you to go. Okay? Still they persisted. Sergeant Gonzalez waited. He waited and again went to them and said, it's time for you to go. You're causing a problem. We need you to leave the premises. Again, he waited. There was no movement. And still, the protest is loud. It's using profane language. It's turning into an ugly situation. Finally, a third time, Sergeant Gonzalez says, it's time to go. You have to go now. Even still, they refused. It was at this point, after what is several warnings, Sergeant Gonzalez and his people made the decision that it was time to place others under arrest, and specifically Juan Reina, who was sitting at the curb on the back. He's the one who had been told it was time to go. He's the one who was being held responsible. They told him that he was being placed under arrest. And this Iranian did not resist in the classic sense of the arms flailing or anything along those lines. What he did is he became stiff, making it impossible for him to be handcuffed by just one officer. It required several officers to get him under control. At the same time, Sergeant McKay had approached Juanita Helfrey with the same warnings. She was aware that she had to leave. She refused to leave. Also, it should be noted that they are well aware of this court order limiting when and where they can protest, because Ms. Helfrey is one of the named parties on that court order. At this point, they told her she had to go, and she complied. They told her she was under arrest, and she did comply with the arrest. And that was how the incident took place that night. So again, you were going to hear the testimony of 3 police officers and other security personnel from Jacobs Field, the Gateway Complex. We're going to explain exactly what happened that night. And furthermore, you will see a videotape which will further show you exactly what it was that took place that night. You will see that the elements of this offense were met. Okay, now, in the course of the defense's case, you are probably going to hear testimony that is going to try to cloud the issues. That's going to try to make you think as though you have to make a decision about other issues. You don't. Your role in this case is to determine whether or not the 3 individuals at that trial table committed the crimes of which they are accused. Period. That's your job. And I believe that when you hear the testimony and when you see the videotape, you will agree that they did in fact commit these crimes and should be found guilty of these crimes. Thank you for your time.
Well, protest is obviously not a new concept in America, and indeed, during jury selection process, the names of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi were used in the voir dire, the process of jury selection, to talk about the question of protest, which underlies the arrest in this case. And Stephen Ministeri, on the question of protest, how is this case different from or similar to cases which have involved burning of American flags, for example?
The Supreme Court has said you have an absolute constitutional right to burn an American flag under some circumstances, which means the Supreme Court is saying that fire is an acceptable form of protest. Now, I think one of the differences is whether that fire then can cause harm. But fire by itself is not the harm. You'd have to show in this case, I think, that the fire was next to something that could cause a substantial harm to a person or property. And I think if they had taken Chief Wahoo's effigy and put it on a pole the way that you burn a flag, that you might not even be here today on that particular charge.
Natasha, do you agree with Steve that the difference between a case and no case here is the proximity of the flames to the leaves of the tree?
I think so. I think that if this had been on a pole, we may not be here. And it's still
is that a small difference on which to hang it?
Well, here, one of the main charges is the criminal damaging. And if it was just on a pole that they brought themselves, it wouldn't be damaging any private property. But here, you have the tree, which they claim was damaged. Looks like it's burning a little bit during the videotape. And that's what made them say, wait a minute, you're doing something beyond what you're allowed to do in the protest. But it's really, you know, as I said before, it's a fine line. Then they went into arrest, and then they said that Bellecourt and the other people arrested were resisting arrest.
Much discussion in American courts these days and in jurisprudence about victims. Is it likely that the position taken by the ball club had an effect on whether this prosecution went ahead or not, do you think, in this case?
I think if the Cleveland Indians came out publicly and said, we really would like the police to drop the charges, I think you would have a lot of public pressure. I think they probably sat back and said, you know, this is a nuisance, and if this would help deter it, we're not going to say anything.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm Raymond Brown. The Atlanta Braves, the Washington Redskins, the Kansas City Chiefs have all used Native American imagery in their nicknames. Such use is not exactly new. But Vernon Bellecourt and other Native American activists protested outside the Cleveland Indians Stadium. They say it's just gone too far. Bellecourt and 2 other protesters stand trial on a variety of misdemeanor charges, including criminal endangering for burning in effigy the Cleveland Indians mascot. But first, before we continue with our coverage of that case, let's go to the Court TV News Center where Dan Broden is standing by. Well, we're going to continue now our coverage of a trial from Cleveland Municipal Court where 3 Native Americans are on trial as a result of their protests at a Cleveland Indians game last fall, objecting to the use of mascots based on Native American imagery by the Cleveland Indians Ball Club, including their use of the mascot Chief Wahoo. We've heard the prosecutor's opening. One of the defendants is going to appear for himself, Mr. Bellecourt. That means he's pro se. But Mr. Terry Gilbert, a lawyer, represents the other 2 defendants, and here's his opening statement.
Members of the jury, on October 23rd, 1997, 3 Native American people, Juan Reyna, Vernon Bellecourt, and Juanita Halfray, took a bold stand against what they felt to be was an unjust and racially motivated symbol that degrades and demeans their people, and that is the Chief Wahoo. And they did this in the tradition of Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Medgar Evers, and many known and unknown people throughout the ages who took stands and dared to challenge that which was unjust and unfair to a proud people. They were peaceful, they were nonviolent, and they operated within the law, contrary to what the city of Cleveland would suggest occurred that night. And only to do one thing, to get one message out, and that was this, that we as a proud nation of people will not tolerate appropriating our name, our image, defame our culture and our religion in the name of a game, in the name of a sport. And as those who have before them took such stands against the establishment or the system of power on issues that the power system did not agree with, they were treated in very similar ways, and that is to try to create criminals out of them and to use and distort the laws in order to serve their interests, that it is important to create criminals out of people who dare to take stands and who dare to send out a message that those who don't agree with would like to eliminate. If nonviolent protest on the outskirts of a public sports facility paid for by our taxpayers' money is a crime, then we are in deep trouble as a freedom-loving people and as a tolerant people. This case is not about criminal trespass, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, criminal endangerment, resisting arrest. It's about freedom of speech, which is part of the highest law of this land. It's about suppressing a message that was about to get out to millions of people around the world who were focused on Cleveland, Ohio on October 23rd, 1997 during the World Series. It is this protest that was naturally done at the place where the Wahoo would be seen and where the opposition to the Wahoo would be seen. It wasn't taking place in the flats or at City Hall or some other place where no one would see it. And I would submit to you that the motivation for these arrests was not because of any criminal conduct, because they had been allowed to be there, as Mr. Shepard said, 9 times that month. It was because they didn't want to allow the success of that message to be gotten out to the people of the world. Now, the 3 people who are on trial are not just some people who haven't lived law-abiding lives. Juan Reyna is the chairman of the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity of Resistance, which is a coalition of Indian and non-Indian people to protect religious and cultural rights of indigenous people in northern, eastern Ohio. Vernon Bellecourt, 66 years old, has dedicated his life to these causes. He's president of the National Coalition on Racism in Sports, headquartered in Minneapolis, and is a national representative of the American Indian Movement. Juanita Helfrey, 57 years old, mother of 2 grown children, works for the United Church of Christ, which has its national office here in Cleveland, represents 1.5 million members and 6,100 local churches across the country, and has gone on record as opposing negative racial stereotypes. And she is the Minister for Racial Justice Programs nationally for that organization. And she's also very active in the 500-year committee of dignity and resistance. Juanita is a Hipatsa of the Hipatsa Nation. Vernon Bellecourt is of the Ojibwe Anishinaabe, and Juan Reno is a Mexican Apache. Very proud Native Americans who are serious and committed in this effort. They are not criminals.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, Vernon Bellecourt, a man who representing himself, will be heard from. We're about to watch something comparatively unusual, a man representing himself. It is only municipal court. There's not a lot of jail time at stake, but perhaps a lot of principle. Vernon Bellecourt, a Native American who with 2 others protested outside Cleveland Municipal Stadium last year in the fall against the continued use by the Cleveland Baseball Club of the Indian mascot and the name Indians, right now on trial for resisting arrest. Let's hear him open to the jury on his own behalf.
Well, again, greetings to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I think Mr. Gilbert pretty much articulated our case and the evidence that's going to be presented here during the trial. First, I'm being charged with criminal endangering rather, and resisting arrest. I believe that the evidence will show that I am not guilty of those charges. Rather, it's a smokescreen to try to criminalize legitimate protest in order to silence protest. In addition to other work that I do, I'm the president of the National Coalition on Racism in Sports and Media. And what I want to share with you is that this is not a new issue. That this issue has been around most of my life. I've heard our people voice objections time and time again. There have been demonstrations taking place at Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta, Robert F. Kennedy Stadium in Washington, D.C., Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, Doak Campbell Field in Tallahassee, Florida, the home of the Florida Seminoles. The team, of course, living by is adjacent to them is the Seminole Nation. And of course, Cleveland. I believe demonstrations have been taking place here for a bigger part of 25 years, the last quarter of a century. Fact is, these demonstrations have been taking place so often that I believe that the fans who come by and shout epitaphs at us, spit at us, have become immune to them, where they try to dismiss us as unimportant. Oftentimes, rather than listen to the message, They want to attack the messenger. In what has been described by Indian people and friends and supporters of all races and faith as the World Series of racism, particularly when it's between Atlanta and Cleveland, and of course all of us are very pleased that the Florida Marlins first sent those Tomahawk choppers from Georgia back into the hills, losers, and also sent the Cleveland baseball team back to the dugout, losers. On October 23rd, as was indicated by Mr. Gilbert, we called a press conference and we notified the media that we were going to be at the little treed area just near Bob Feller's statue. When we got there with a portable sound system, dragging an effigy of the racist Wahoo through the streets, I, along with a young woman in our group, hung the effigy in a tree, and we started our press conference and our rally. Several law enforcement officers in Cleveland police uniforms, I believe on hire as a private security force for Richard Jacobs, approached us and correctly advised us that this is not the free speech area. The free speech area is over here. So we took our sound system and we untied the racist Wahoo from the tree, and we went over to the free speech area that's been set aside by a federal referee. Even though many of us feel that that agreement was not binding on some of us, so that we would not have any problems with the police who would obviously curtail or stop our demonstration, we voluntarily moved to that area. We were very happy because, you know, some of these Wahoo fans, you know, they get, first of all, they say, well, we're honoring our Indian people. You know, we like to hear them say our Indian people, be like our Negroes. And when we tell them it's not an honor, those same fans get very belligerent, very antagonistic. And many times we've had to engage in dialogue with them in order to try to educate them about the issue. So naturally we were very pleased when the police department placed a cordon around the demonstrators, around us. And the fact is, on several occasions, I can't list the number, we were very happy that the police refused to let unruly fans into that area. And so the only people who were there who were people among our press conference and our demonstration. So we went over to that particular designated free speech area and we hung the effigy of Wahoo in the tree. Now I want to emphasize one thing, and I tried to do that during the voir dire. You know, we love baseball. You know, we remember Allie Reynolds, the great Yankee. We remember Jim Thorpe won more gold medals for America in the Olympics. And so we love baseball. But the message that we're putting forth, play baseball, stop playing Indians. We're a living people. We have a culture. We have self-esteem. We have pride in a good sense. And when we see that reduced to a cheap character, a grinning buck-tooth logo, and so that you can understand, I want to emphasize one thing. It would be as if they changed the team tomorrow to the Cleveland Negroes and took Wahoo off the cap and put Little Black Sambo or Rastus there. You know, if they tried to do that, I have a sense that thousands of people of all races would be supporting the black community to get rid of it.
Then Mr. Bellecourt went on to indicate to this jury that he felt there was no evidence of his guilt.
I think you will find that there's no evidence that I'm guilty as charged. And if there is no evidence, then we hope that you will acquit. Finally, of course, I was not going to bring this out. I was going to try to introduce it into evidence during the course of the trial. But Mr. Shepard made references to a, how did you describe that sign? What was the word?
This is your argument.
Can I ask that question? Profane.
I believe is the word.
Profane. And I agree with him. I agree with it as profane. And that is the point of trying to get rid of this profane Chief Wahoo, which by now you all understand is a very racist symbol. And so in conclusion, I want to share the profane exhibit. This comes from, as you can see on the bottom, can everybody read that? Random House Dictionary. And those words are profane. I think you will agree with me on that. And while it says Redskins, you could just put Wahoo there, which in itself is a slur against the original and natural people of this land. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much.
Well, an interesting case, and there's an issue, Natasha, that you've raised, which is how is it possible that if the authorities knew he was merely moving the effigy from one tree to the next, that after on the second tree or the third tree they could charge him with an offense?
I was surprised by that. He described the moment when they had set up in the wrong area and they were moving to the correct protest area, and he said, and we had it already hanging on a tree and we took it down and we moved the effigy. Well, if these peacekeepers or the off-duty police officers who were security saw that happening and they knew that this might be a problem, why didn't they say, don't hang it up, don't set it on fire, what are you going to do with the effigy? They didn't. Perhaps the answer will be in the testimony, and we can find out by beginning with the testimony of the first witness, Sergeant Andy Gonzalez, called by the state.
Now, how exactly did you set up your security detail that evening?
My security, we broke it in half. I split it in half with Sergeant McKay taking the eastern portion of the Gateway complex being by Gate C, which is by the Gate C is right outside or right by Bachfelder statute, and I remained with some of the officers over on the Ontario side of the complex.
Once again, Sergeant McKay is in one group. Are you still in contact with Sergeant McKay?
I have radio contact with Sergeant McKay, yes.
About what time did you begin to go to these different posts or to split up?
Immediately after roll call.
So, approximately what time?
About 5:30, 5:45.
Okay. What happened once you went about your detail? Is anything unusual?
Nothing unusual happened in my detail area, which would be by the Gateway Plaza or the Ontario Street. I can't testify to what occurred by Gate C. I was not there. I didn't witness it. I can't tell you that I did hear.
Objection.
Sergeant, at some point while you were over on the Ontario side of the building, did you have cause to go back to the other side of the building?
Towards Gate C, yes.
And about what time was that?
If my memory serves me right, that may have been about 6:30 or 6:45.
And did you in fact respond to Gate C?
Yes.
What did you see upon your arrival at Gate C?
Upon my arrival, what immediately drew my attention was the water sprinkler was on. I was directing my attention and started talking with a gentleman from a representative, I guess, from Pepsi. And I was strongly urging him to move certain equipment.
What kind of equipment was he wanting to move?
He had some helium tanks that was feeding a couple balloons. There were 4 balloons posted on the corners there. And in the center was one big Pepsi balloon. And I was asking him to move his equipment because I could see there was a lot of movement over by the plaza area.
Now, when you say over by the plaza area, Well, I'll have you step down if you could just for one moment and come over to the map and point out exactly where you're describing these events.
Originally, Sergeant McKay was responsible for this area, and I stayed over here.
All the parties can see.
Did you see that? Go ahead.
I'm waiting for Ms. Helfer.
Oh, okay.
So the area that I'm referring to now, where the Pepsi display was at, is right, yeah, I guess you could say right in the middle here. On each corner, there is smaller Pepsi displays, smaller balloons, I guess, filled with helium or supported by helium. And there was a lot of activity right on this line, literally on this line here. There was some activity. Of course, the crowd coming into Jacobs Field was ingressing in through this area. My location and the conversation that I had with the Pepsi gentleman was right in this area over here.
Okay, now, were the defendants and their party also in that same area? If you could describe, I mean, I just want to make sure that we understand.
The form of the question.
Was there anybody else in the area besides the individual you spoke to from the Pepsi display?
Yes.
Who else was in the area?
I can't tell you exactly who else was in the area. I know that Sergeant McKay and she approached me and told me what was going on. I remember seeing Todd Greathouse. I remember seeing some of my officers there. I don't recall if the defendants, Mr. Reyna or Ms. Helfer, were there. I don't remember seeing them.
Was there anything else unusual in that area besides just the Pepsi display?
Well, there was a lot of water. Apparently the sprinkler system had been on and they just shut it off. And the area here was wet, and that was really the only unusual thing that I saw.
Okay. And you can go back and have a seat if you prefer. Sergeant, after you'd gone there, did you confer with your fellow officers at that point?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do after you talked to your officers?
While talking to Sergeant McKay and the other officers, I was requested to come back to the Ontario Street Plaza.
Well, as we continue our broadcast of this trial, I'm going to leave you and our guests in the capable hands of Carol Randolph. Steve, Natasha, pleasure seeing you. I'm sure I'll be seeing you again, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Stay with us, though. Carol's coming.
What's in a name? Well, apparently quite a bit if you're a Native American and believe a national baseball team's logo and name is racially offensive. And welcome back to Court TV. I'm Carol Randolph. 3 Native Americans were arrested after protesting the Cleveland baseball team's use of the name Indian and the mascot logo Wahoo. Prosecutors say the defendants took their protest too far when an effigy of Chief Wahoo was ignited near helium containers. But Bellecourt and his co-defendants say they did nothing wrong. Let's go back into the courtroom once again as we look back at the continued direct examination of Sergeant Gonzalez.
And once again, how long after you had arrived at the Gate C area was it that you received this call?
I would say I was at Gate C approximately 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes.
What happened? What did you see when you responded to the Ontario side of the building? What did you see there?
When I went back to the other location, can I show on the map the other location? Just the other location that I was talking to is right in this area over here. This is the other location that I responded to. Your Honor, did you see that?
Okay. And what did you see when you responded there? What did you see?
When I responded back over there, I observed a group of protesters gathering on that site there.
Okay. Was that unusual in any way?
Objection.
It was at that time, yes,
Why was that unusual?
because they have been ordered off the property.
Objection. Move to strike. No foundation.
Okay, you want to...
Had you yourself had conversations with the protesters at that point?
At that point,
Yeah, at the point prior to arriving back on the Ontario side of the building, had you personally had any conversations with the protesters?
no.
Okay. So you arrived back over there and the protesters were there.
Correct.
And what did you do once you saw the protesters there?
I approached Mr. Reyna, and I advised him that he was trespassing and that he had to leave the property.
Why would you choose Mr. Reyna? Well, first of all, were there other people there besides Mr. Reyna?
Yes, sir.
And why did you choose Mr. Reyna to approach?
I consider Mr. Reyna one of the leaders of the organization, and whenever there is a point to mediate, I try to mediate with that leader. And in this case, since I am familiar with Mr. Reyna, I approached Mr. Reyna and ordered him off.
And how did Mr. Reyna respond to your request that you leave?
He told me he was not leaving.
And what was Mr. Reyna doing when you approached him?
I believe Mr. Reyna had a bullhorn in his hand, and he told me he was not leaving, and he was also talking with passerbys and also having conversation with other members of his group.
About how many other members of the group were there, if you had to guess?
I would say that there were between 15 and 20 other people, members of his group there.
And how would you describe the contact that you were having with Mr. Reyna at that point?
Objection.
What did you do in response to Mr. Reyna telling you he wasn't going to leave?
I warned Mr. Reyna, along with the other members of his party, that if they did not comply with my requests and if they refused to leave the property, that I would arrest them for aggravated disorderly conduct and criminal trespass.
Okay. And what was the response to this statement?
Mr. Reyna's response at first was that he was not going to leave. After repeat, I warned him 3 times.
Okay. And how long between each warning? Was it one right after the other? Or?
No. The first warning, after the first warning, and speaking with Mr. Reyna and the people in his group, I would back off and give them time to consider what I had just said and give them the opportunity to leave on their own volition. I probably gave them between 5 to 7 minutes in between each warning when I would come back and advise them again that they were trespassing and asking them to leave.
Once again, how many times did you warn them to leave?
I warned them 3 times to leave.
And did he leave?
No, sir.
Okay. What happened after the 3rd warning that you gave?
Immediately after the 3rd warning, I looked at Mr. Reyna, at Juan, and I informed that he was under arrest. I reached over towards Officer Santiago and asked for his handcuffs, and I placed Mr. Reyna under arrest. He immediately stiffened up and went on the ground, holding his arms to his side, and with the assistance of the other officers, we were able to handcuff him.
And you yourself were involved in the arrest?
I was directly involved with Mr. Reyna's arrest, yes.
You were not involved with the arrest of himself, is that correct?
No, I was not involved with.
After you arrested Mr. Reyna, where did you take him?
He was taken, I didn't take him personally, but he was taken down to the holding facility under Jacobs Field. He was taken through one of the, I don't know, I hate to call them Twin Towers, but I guess that's what Counselor has been referring to. One of the Twin Towers has an opening in it that you can access and walk down through it, and it'll lead you into the basement of Jacobs Field. And walking through there, immediately, probably a couple of doors to the right, was a holding facility that Mr. Reyna was held.
Did you have any further contact with Mr. Reyna that day?
Yes, I did.
When did you have further contact?
After he was arrested and after Miss Helfrey was arrested and taken down there, I went down to the holding facility.
Yeah, what was your purpose of going down to the holding facility?
To make sure that the booking procedure was going properly.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have the cross-examination of this witness. Stay with us. People come under fire after one of them burns an effigy during a protest. And welcome back to Court TV. I'm Carol Randolph. Vernon Bellecourt says that Cleveland Indians mascot is a racist stereotype of Native Americans. And during a demonstration at Jacobs Field this past October, he ignited an effigy of the controversial mascot, Chief Wahoo. He was charged with criminal endangerment and resisting arrest. Now, Juan Reyna and Juanito Helfrey were charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct after they would not disperse. We've already seen the direct examination of one of the witnesses who was there at the time who helped to arrest these individuals. And now in a cross-examination, Sergeant Gonzalo is asked whether or not he told the defendants whether or not if they didn't leave, they would be arrested. Let's watch.
We now know that there was a dummy or an effigy burn, right? You didn't see that, is that correct?
I did not.
Did you see Mr. Bellecourt there when you arrived?
No.
He had already been removed?
Yes.
And you do not know how the water sprinkler system was turned on, or who turned it on, or your first-hand knowledge? Do you have knowledge of how that water sprinkler was turned on?
I do have knowledge, yes.
Because somebody told you what happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you arrived there, the fire, whatever fire was out, is that correct?
That's correct.
And yet you saw a man there with a balloon and a helium tank, is that right?
Yes.
And he was just standing there, is that right?
He wasn't just standing there, no.
Well, it was, but he hadn't obviously moved, is that right?
He was upset because he was being asked to move,
Right.
and I was not ordering him, but I was asking him to move part of his display, and he was upset because that would involve his placing people at those locations to physically hold the display down, whereas it had been.
So in spite of whatever happened with the effigy burning, the man with the helium tank and the balloon was upset because you asked him to move, is that right?
He was upset when I was talking to him.
Okay. And strike that. And you were asked about what you noticed, and you said basically you noticed that the ground was wet.
The grass was wet.
Were there people running in panic? Were there people running in fear or anything like that when you came there?
There was a lot of activity. There was some running. I did see some running. I couldn't truthfully or honestly say that they were running because of fear or panic.
Right. All right, so then how long were you there at the site of the burning, or where the sprinkler was on here? Is that right over here?
Yes.
How long were you there?
I was there for about 20 to 25 minutes.
And were there protesters around during that 25 minutes?
Yes, there were.
Did you tell any of those protesters that if you don't get away from that area, which has been designated as a free speech area, you're going to be arrested?
No, I did not.
You didn't tell any of the protesters that were still there after the dummy was burned that they would be arrested for trespass. But way over here on the other side, you tell those protesters that they're going to be under arrest for trespass. Is that correct?
I need to clarify something, Counselor.
I just want to make sure that I understand that you didn't ask any of the protesters near the site where the effigy was burned that they need to leave the area and that they will be arrested for trespass. Your answer is no. Is that right?
No, my answer is there were no protesters in the grass area when I got there.
All right. But then you said you were there for 25 minutes and there were protesters there.
Yes, that's correct.
And you didn't tell them they had to leave. Is that correct?
I did not have conversation with them at that point.
So you didn't tell them that they had to leave, correct?
Correct.
This way. It's difficult for me to understand why these people were arrested. But there were peacekeepers there, and there were police officers there, and there's no violence there. And I guess what I'm asking you is the reason you arrested them is because it's private property to you?
The reason they were arrested is because they were breaking the law.
Is it because you consider that area to be private property?
The reason why Mr. Reyna was arrested is because he was breaking a codified ordinance of the city of Cleveland.
That's a nice answer, but not the answer I was looking for. The question was, is if you charged him with trespass?
That's correct.
Right? And trespass means to be in an area which is unauthorized, right?
Correct.
Okay. It's authorized to protest at 6 o'clock, at 6:15, at 6:30, at 6:45. And when Sergeant Gonzalez comes there at 6:45, all of a sudden it's not authorized. Right? So you're the one who decides when you can engage in free speech and be not guilty of trespass, and when you engage in expression and are guilty of trespass. You're the one who decides that, right? Now you signed a complaint, did you not, sir?
Yes, sir.
Is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
All right. This is what you charged Juan Reyna with. On or about 23rd of October, 1997, within the city of Cleveland, Ohio, Juan Reyna did recklessly cause inconvenience, annoyance, alarm to another by engaging in fighting, in threatening harm to persons or property, or in violent or turbulent behavior, and persisted after a reasonable request to desist. Did you sign that under oath?
Yes, I did.
And all that Mr. Reyna said, I'm not leaving, and he went limp, right?
Counselor, as I was trying to tell you, it's difficult to answer your question without taking the entire picture into context. It would be unfair for me to sit here and answer that question, yes or no, without explaining the entire situation.
Well, we've been here you've been on the stand for over an hour and a half. And I don't get it. Where's the fighting? Was he fighting? Yes or no?
I can't answer that question because it appears to me anyway that you're trying to separate one continuous incident into two separate incidents.
Very simple question. Did any time that night did you see Juan Reyna fighting?
Fighting with another person? No.
Well, okay. Did you see at any time Juan Reyna threatening harm
to persons or property?
I heard him threaten harm, yes.
Who was that? Who did he threaten harm to?
People that were walking by.
What did he say?
I can't recall exactly, but as part of his protest, he would make remarks. He would be very voiceful about his feelings. He would yell certain things back at these people who were coming into the ballpark.
But you went up to him and you didn't say, stop yelling at people. You said, you're trespassing, and if you don't leave, you're going to be arrested. Is that right?
I told Mr. Reyna to stop and that he was trespassing. That's correct.
And the fact of the matter is, it's because he went limp that you charged him with aggravated disorderly conduct. Is that correct?
No, sir.
Do you know about Juanita Helfrey?
Do I know about her?
How was she aggravated?
Objection.
You didn't see her, right?
I did see her.
Okay. You did see her. How was she engaged in aggravated disorderly conduct?
Ms. Help?
I do my objection, Your Honor. He had testified already. He wasn't involved in the arrest.
He just said he saw her.
Right, but he did say that he saw her. He can describe any behavior that he saw.
Was she also engaged in aggravated disorderly conduct that you saw?
Ms. Helfer refused to leave the property when I had asked him to leave, yes.
I understand.
So we have a problem about definition now, whether or not this was resisting arrest or aggravated disorderly conduct here. I'm going to talk about this with our guest, Natasha, as a criminal defense attorney. Situations where you believe perhaps that the arrest itself is unlawful, can you resist?
If the arrest, the underlying charges are not lawful, yes, you can.
Does that matter from state to state or just a general principle?
Well, I think as a general principle, but there seem to be some states that have finer lines. But in New York State, if the underlying charge is no good, then the resisting arrest, you can resist arrest.
And then, Stephen, let me move to you regarding this, because there's some discussion as to whether this is public or private property. Seems to be in dispute and may later on be determined. But what's the difference? What happens in terms of what you were doing as an individual?
Well, if I'm going to protest, I can protest, say, on a sidewalk in front of a city hall. No one's going to object. But I can't take that same protest and go into your living room, because that would be trespassing into your living room. Similarly, in a ballpark, if it's privately owned, you don't have a right to go onto somebody else's private property. However, if it's public property and it's an area where you normally would be allowed to protest, then how can you be trespassing on something that you as one of the taxpayers also owns?
Well, this argument is that taxpayers' money, at least some of it, was used to build this brand new stadium. So, just a view about where you would be in terms of public or private.
And on top of that, even if they turned out that it was considered to be private, you still can only be trespassing if you don't have permission to be there. And they could argue that they had implied permission to be there because they had been there 9 times a month previously, and also they had been allowed to demonstrate earlier. And I think that was a very effective cross-examination that showed, you know, it wasn't the property owner that decided whether the free speech time was up. It was a police officer. He's not the owner of the property.
Well, that's not his job. He's not, but it's a traffic cop in speech. Unfortunately, I just sat down and you two are leaving me, but the little bit of time that we've had together, I thank you and hope to see you both again.
You're very welcome, Carol. Thank you for having me.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue with the cross-examination of this witness, and we'll also give you the latest legal news. Stay with us. A protest against alleged racism in baseball has landed these people in court. And welcome back to Court TV. I'm Carol Randolph. Vernon Bellecourt, Juan Reyna, and Juanito Helfrey said the mascot for the Cleveland Indians baseball team portrays a negative image of Native Americans. And on October the 23rd, 1997, they protested outside the Indians baseball park. But prosecutors say the defendants went too far when they burned the team's mascot, Chief Wahoo, in effigy. As a result, they've been charged with misdemeanor crimes and could spend 90 days in jail. But before we resume coverage of this trial, let's check in with Dan Broden in the Court TV's News Center. Dan?
Well, Carol, that's the news. I'm Dan Broden. Now back to Carol Randolph.
Thank you, Dan. And once again, we go back to a trial that took place earlier this month in Cleveland, Ohio, where 3 Native Americans were protesting the Cleveland baseball team's use of the term Indian, as well as the mascot logo, which they considered to be racially offensive. That was of Chief Wahoo. We've already heard the first witness on the stand. This is a Sergeant Gonzalez. He was one of those who actually signed the arrest warrant against these individuals. And now we have the cross-examination of one of the defendants by the defendant himself. This is Mr. Bellecourt, who is representing himself pro se. And as he goes into the courtroom, he wants to know once again about what exactly was going on at the time that they claim that the individuals were trespassing. Let's go in and watch.
Were you involved in the conversation with police officers down under the stadium at the holding cells when they were discussing what charges to bring against me?
Yes, I was.
And as you recall, I think it was the woman police officer, and I wish someone would tell me her name.
That would be Sergeant Sharon McKay.
Okay. And I do understand that there are witnesses that will, if called, will testify that there was some discussion, as you just said, as to what to charge me with. And Sergeant McKay suggested that they may charge me with arson. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And somebody else reminded her that in order to be charged with arson, damage has to be more than $250. Is that correct?
I think that we didn't talk about value. We talked more about the felony versus the misdemeanor.
Okay. I think I only have about 2 questions, and that is, I'm concerned about the chain of command here. You're in a Cleveland police uniform, and of course we all felt you were representing the Cleveland police, but we find now you were hired out to Richard Jacobs, Gateway Stadium, the Cleveland Baseball Club, to provide security on the perimeter.
Well, let me clarify that. I was contracted to Gateway Corporation, and I was directly employed by Tenable Security.
Okay. So could you kind of describe for the jury and the court, what is the chain of command? Was there someone that one of your officers or a commanding officer directed you as to how to deal with the demonstrators in view of the fact that the effigy was burned and I was arrested?
Sergeant McKay took the lead as far as your charge because she witnessed and observed what was going on there. We did have conversation about your charge, and we also had conversation about your condition. Based on your condition and the information that Sergeant McKay brought out, the charge of criminal damaging, we decided on criminal damaging charges against you.
And what was the basis for that criminal damaging?
He wasn't the one who made the decision on this charge.
Did McKay, is it Sergeant McKay?
Yes, sir.
And yourself, Sergeant Gonzalez, you made the decision whether to arrest Mr. Reyna or Ms. Helfrey, or for that matter, myself. Is that was a decision that was made by both of you, or did you consult with your commanding officer, a lieutenant, colonel, whatever they call him, or the chief of police for that matter? Was he, well, go ahead, answer.
That's a good question. Every Cleveland police officer has total discretion and authority to exercise an arrest regardless of a commander, lieutenant, captain, regardless of their rank. So to put it in simpler terms, Mr. Bellecourt, a patrol officer does not need my approval or my authority to effect an arrest.
I have one final question, and that is, were there discussions with Gateway Stadium officials and the Cleveland Police Department and the security company that you were working contracted out to previous to the demonstration that took place on October 23rd? Was there any discussions about this, or how you were going to deal with demonstrators or anything of that nature?
We coordinated with officers from Jacobs Field in the event that the protest became so big that we needed reinforcements and we needed support.
But there was no discussion as to the parameters of the behavior of the demonstrators, that if they did this, you were going to respond or react this way? There was no such discussions?
There was no discussion predetermining or saying that if this happened, we were going to take this. We just see every officer reacts according to his or her training based on the probable cause present in front of them. In other words, based on the information that they have in front of them.
All right, that was one of the first witnesses in this case, and it gives us a chance now to introduce our new guest commentator at Court TV's own Michael Christian, who happened to be in that courtroom and reporting on this case. And good afternoon, Michael.
Hello, Carol.
Let's talk about first the Cleveland baseball officials' reason behind the name Indian. Where did it come from?
Well, according to the Cleveland Indians, this name was chosen in 1915, and it's to honor a Native American player, a man named Louis Sockalexis. He was on the team at that point. Indians have said all along that the name was an attempt to honor him. Also, you can point out the fact that Ohio is an Indian name. Cuyahoga County, where Cleveland is located, is an Indian name. So there is a long tradition in that part of Ohio for naming things after Native Americans. Certainly, I don't think there's any question that it was meant as an insult, particularly at the time it was done in 1915. The time is now, it's different. The question is now that it's different. It's a different time. It's perhaps a more politically correct time. Should we still be naming sports teams or having sports teams now named after Native Americans, particularly if Native Americans object, and they certainly seem to object in this case?
Well, now, the type of jury that you have in a case like this would be crucial, especially where the issues could be very amorphous, and you've got people who are certainly team supporters. So tell us about that voir dire process.
Well, the jury selection process in this case took about a day and a half, a little bit longer than a day and a half. It took quite a while, and there was a lot of discussion of what the team name meant to Clevelanders, history of the team, a lot of discussion of the history of the civil rights movement, of civil disobedience. We heard Cesar Chavez mentioned. We heard Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, people who had gone through periods of civil disobedience. We heard from the prosecutor, we heard from Terry Gilbert, the defense attorney, and we heard from Vernon Bellecourt asking questions of prospective jurors. So there was a lot of discussion, and I think maybe a little more leeway than one has in the normal jury selection process. The judge allowed the parties to actually really get into this issue before they selected a jury.
A jury of 8?
Yes, that's correct.
And half men, half women, what?
You know, I don't have that in front of me. I'll tell you at the next break, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I remember this. Won't do that to you again. After this break, we'll hear from another security guard, Sharon McKay, trying to pull the burning Chief Wahoo effigy out of the tree.
You were aware that American Indians hate the logo, and a lot of Indian baseball fans love the logo.
I'm aware that there was a court order.
Welcome back. I'm Carol Randolph. Well, 3 Native Americans are in an Ohio court charged with several misdemeanors, including burning an effigy of the Cleveland Indians mascot and causing damage to private property. Now, on the stand now is Sharon McKay. She's an off-duty police officer working stadium security at the time of the incident.
Now, over the course of time that you were there, did anything unusual happen with regard to this effigy?
I'll start by saying that Todd Greathouse informed...
Yeah, without speaking about what somebody else told you.
I was paying attention to the effigy and Mr. Bellecourt in particular. I had reason to believe that
Objection what she has reason to believe. That's totally irrelevant.
I don't think it's completely relevant. She's talking about why it is that she was paying attention to these.
The question was, what did she observe that was unusual? Period.
Okay, the effigy was started on fire.
Okay, now did you see the fire lit yourself?
No, I did not.
Okay. When the fire started, who was in the area of the effigy?
All of the protesters were in the area, and Mr. Bellecourt was in the area.
Okay, and what did you do in response to seeing the effigy go up in flames?
I first went to the effigy to try to pull it down. It was tied with a cable to the tree. I thought it was tied with a rope, but it was a metal type cable, a bicycle type cable. And I tried to pull it down from the tree, and Mr. Bellecourt grabbed me and struggled with me to keep me from pulling the effigy down from the tree.
Where exactly did he grab you?
In my arms. He wasn't allowing me to pull it down.
Okay, and what did you do in response to him grabbing you this way?
I told the officers, 2 other officers that were with me, to place Mr. Bellecourt under arrest.
Did you say this in a manner loud enough for Mr. Bellecourt to hear it?
I'm sure I did, but I couldn't say I can't swear by it.
And did Mr. Bellecourt stop struggling with you at that point?
He stopped struggling with me because then I was no longer in contact with him. I was continuing to work on the effigy. The 2 officers who were arresting him were then with him. And when I realized that I couldn't pull the effigy down, I turned around and my attention went back to Mr. Bellecourt.
Okay, now all the while is the effigy still burning?
All the while the effigy is still burning.
Okay. How were you able to stop the effigy from burning?
Ultimately, the sprinkler system was turned on, and that stopped it.
Okay. Was the effigy in the tree the entire time it was burning?
Yes, it was tied to the tree. The tree was burning.
Upon putting out the fire, what did you do next?
We had a discussion. I believe we had this part. I really couldn't tell you what the next exact moment.
Was Mr. Bellecourt placed under arrest?
Yes, he was placed under arrest.
Did you personally participate in this arrest?
Yes, I did.
How so?
I assisted the officers. Mr. Bellecourt was struggling with them, and I assisted him. We placed him in handcuffed, and then he was taken into the holding facility at Jacobs Field.
Did Mr. Bellecourt go easily, or did he put up a battle?
Objection.
He struggled.
Okay. How long did this struggle last? How long did it take you to get him under control?
10 seconds, 15 seconds, I don't know.
Okay. But he was placed under arrest?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Did you accompany him down to the holding cell?
No, I did not.
Did you have any further contact with Mr. Bellecourt that night?
Yeah, later on that, in the holding cell, eventually we all ended up down at the holding cell, and I saw Mr. Bellecourt down there.
When you say we all ended up down there?
Sergeant Gonzalez, myself, Officer Griffin, Officer Curtis, all the officers eventually ended up down in the holding facility.
Okay. Now, at any point during this evening, did you come in contact with Juanita Helford, who you see seated at the trial table?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Well, how did you come in contact with Ms. Helford?
We advised the protesters that they would have to leave the area. They had created a situation and had they had violated what we believe violated the court order, so we asked them to leave. They left the area over on 9th and Eagle, and we thought that they had left, and one of the officers notified us by radio
That tell us what the officer said. Did you have reason to go to the other side of the state?
Yes, the American Indian protesters were at the other, on Ontario, by the plaza.
Did you yourself go to the Ontario side plaza?
Yes, I did.
Okay. We identified this yesterday, but if you could just step down and show us on the map exactly where it was that you went.
Right over here.
Okay. Now, where had you been earlier in the evening, just for identification purposes?
Street, right here.
Okay, now that's the area you're pointing at now.
This is the grassy area.
Okay, and the second area, the area you pointed out first, that's where you went.
But then we came down the Eagle Avenue to this area here.
Okay, you can go ahead and see. And what did you see when you arrived at the Ontario side plaza there?
The American Indians were protesting. The protesters were protesting.
And what did you do in response to seeing them there?
We asked them to leave, and they were informed that if they did not leave, that they would be placed under arrest.
Okay. Did they leave?
They had a conversation. Ms. Humphrey had a conversation, a basic meeting with the other protesters, advised them.
You got to tell them exactly what she said.
They had a meeting, and Ms. Humphrey and I don't know what Juan's last name is. Juan decided to stay. Everybody else decided to move on.
Okay. Did you warn them again to leave?
I'm not sure exactly how many times they were warned, but they were given an official warning, and they were told that this was officially the warning to leave the property.
And what finally happened when they refused to leave?
Well, I was dealing specifically with Ms. Humphrey, and I knew she was going to be arrested, so I advised her to take all her personal property, anything of value, and give it to another protester so that it would speed up the booking process for her and she could get out faster.
And was she placed under arrest?
Yes, she was.
Okay.
Once again, that is the testimony from one of the arresting officers. And Michael Christian, I said just before the break that I'd give you a chance to tell us more about that jury.
I found out the answer to the question you had, Carol. It was an 8-member jury. It was 4 men and 4 women. It broke down racially. It was 6 black members of the jury, 2 white members, and then there were also 2 alternates, both women.
Let me ask you, too, go back to that original story you were telling us about the Indians' position on why it was that they've named the baseball team that particular name.
Well, again, the Cleveland Indians say that it's named to honor Louis Sockalexis, who was a Native American player early days of the 20th century. Native American protesters say that that's not completely true, that that's something they claim that the Indians organization is just hanging their hat on, that that's a convenient excuse for them. I do have a press release here put out by the Cleveland Indians in name or team justifying their use of the name and so forth, and I'd like to read just a little bit from it. It says, understanding the historical significance of the name Indians, the Cleveland Indians organization is very aware of the sensitivities involved in this issue. We have gone to great lengths to respect those sensibilities and sensitivities, excuse me. In no way do we intend to demean any group, especially one as proud as Native Americans. For example, the Cleveland Indians organization does not animate or humanize our logo in any way. The logo is simply a caricature that has enjoyed decades of fan appeal in the Northeast Ohio area. We also go to great lengths to avoid any use of tomahawks, teepees, warriors on horseback, etc., Indian motifs that are questionable and insensitive at best. Now that's an interesting point, Carol, because there are other sports teams with Indian names.
The Braves,
the Redskins.
Redskins.
The Braves in particular, talking about teepees here, they've got their famous tomahawk chalk with the big tomahawks. Native Americans hate that. The protesters here talked about it not, in moments that the trial was not being held several times. So the Indians organization is at least saying, look, we don't allow that, we just use this name. It's not an insult. In our case, it's an honor.
All right, well, let's go back into that courtroom once again where Ms. McKay is on the stand. Now it's time for cross-examination, and she's asked again what she saw. In fact, who did she see set the fire? Let's see what she has to say.
And what were you doing at the time when you saw the effigy on fire? Where were you?
I was just south of the grassy area actually on Eagle, and I was talking with Todd Greathouse and Jim Folk.
And then at some point you saw the dummy on fire, is that right?
I was told and turned my attention to the
and
dummy.
You saw the dummy on fire?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And you didn't see who started the fire?
No, I didn't.
And then you went over to the fire and you tried to pull it down, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
With your bare hands?
Yes, I was trying to loose what it was tied with. It was tied on one side of the tree. I was on the back side of the tree. At first I started stomping out the fire. That wasn't going to work, and I tried to pull it down to separate the effigy from the tree.
So let me get this straight. And we have a video. We're going to see all that. I presume the prosecutor's going to show it. But when you saw the effigy, it was on the ground?
No, it was tied to the tree.
How did you step on it if it was tied to the tree?
Because there were pieces of it that were falling to the ground.
So you went over there and actually try to pull it down from a string or a rope or something?
I thought it was tied with a rope. I figured I could untie it, but I couldn't.
And where was Mr. Bellecourt?
He was right there by the tree.
Which side?
He was standing to the right of to the left of the tree.
And you were standing to the right?
Well, I came behind him, and then he was standing there right by the tree, on the left of the tree. I came up from the right-hand side. I tried to stomp out some of the fire, couldn't do so. I came up around the side of the tree. When I came up, he came up closer, and we started.
Isn't it a fact that Mr. Bellecourt was trying to pull the rope to raise the effigy which you tried to stop from being burnt? Is that right?
No, sir.
Isn't it a fact that you grabbed him?
No, sir, that's not correct.
You're telling this jury that Mr. Bellecourt grabbed you and struggled with you. Is that what you're saying?
He tried to prevent me.
I'm asking you, did you tell this jury that Mr. Bellecourt grabbed you and struggled with you?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, you subscribed to a report that was submitted in this case, isn't that correct? Have you seen this report that was done? The narrative about the incident with the effigy?
Yes, I have.
I want you to read the pertinent paragraph regarding the incident with the effigy. Read it over to yourself, okay?
Okay. Okay.
All right, is there any mention in that, and this is a detailed account of what happened, right?
It's an account, yes, sir.
And is there any mention in there of you being grabbed by Mr. Bellecourt?
That was the resisting. That was part of the resisting. The officer that wrote the report incorporated it in there.
Well, how can you resist an arrest if you haven't been put under arrest yet? Explain that to me.
I didn't say that that was what happened. I said that the officer incorporated that in the report.
So this officer is wrong?
No, sir, I didn't say that either.
Okay. You would agree with me that you have to be placed under arrest and advised of the fact that you're under arrest before you could be charged with resisting arrest.
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that Mr. Bellecourt was not under arrest during the time during the actual time that the effigy was being burned?
He struggled to prevent me from pulling down the effigy. Once he was placed under arrest, he struggled with the officers who tried to arrest him. So, yes and no. He struggled at both times. He was trying to prevent us from pulling the effigy down, and then he struggled with the officers who were trying to arrest him.
In the report it said the male, he resisted by pulling and jerking and pushing away, thus causing the dummy to go up in flames. In this report it says that the dummy goes up in flames after you and your fellow officers interfered with him burning the effigy.
The dummy was set afire. It was on fire before the arrest.
Did not Mr. Bellecourt indicate that he felt that he had a right to burn the effigy as a demonstration of his free speech?
I don't remember a conversation like that.
Well, just for the record, Mr. Bellecourt calls himself Mr. Bellecourt, not Mr. Bellecourt, but you'll hear all of that in that courtroom. You'll have a chance.
Have appropriated this color.
Welcome back once again. Free speech versus the issue of criminal trespassing. Those are some of the issues in front of a Cleveland jury earlier this month when 3 Native Americans protested the Cleveland Indians' use of the term Indians, as well as the mascot that was used, Chief Wahoo. So go back into the courtroom now. It's time for cross-examination of a witness, second cross-examination, this time by one of the defendants, Mr. Bellecourt, where he asks Officer McKay about whether or not she spoke to him before trying to pull the effigy down. Let's go in and listen.
Now, you indicated to the jury and to the court that when the effigy started going up in flames, I was just really near the effigy. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall, Sergeant, when you came over and attempted to pull the effigy out of the tree, that I had a brief conversation with you? Can you recall what that conversation was?
No, sir.
If I would refresh your memory, maybe you would then remember.
It's possible.
I walked up to you and I said something to the effect, you know, this is a First Amendment right.
Objection, Your Honor. This isn't really a question. This is him recounting the incident for us.
Trying to refresh your memory, Your Honor.
He can ask her if she recalls the conversation. And
even in describing an entire conversation to do so?
Maybe that's what she needs.
I'm trying to refresh the sergeant's mind, that's all.
Go ahead, sir.
So I'm going to ask you the question again because I didn't hear your response. Do you recall the text or the tone of the conversation that I had with you at that point?
No, sir, I do not.
But you just said to the jury, of course, that I grabbed you. Did I grab you, Sergeant McKay?
You grabbed me to prevent me. You would grab my arms to prevent me. I was trying to pull down, and you were preventing me from pulling the effigy down. That was what I had testified to. I didn't say you struggled with. I didn't say you wrestled with me. I said I tried to pull the effigy down. You grabbed me to prevent me from doing so.
Well, did I not tell you?
Struggling over the effigy.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I not at that time advise you that I felt it was our constitutional right to burn this effigy? And then I said, you know, it's just a little fire. Why don't you just let it go?
I don't recall that conversation.
Okay. You then testified that as you tried to pull the effigy down, I had the hold of the wire behind the tree, and I would pull it back up. Correct?
No, I didn't testify to that.
You didn't testify to that? Well, I mean, regardless of whether you testified that or not, I thought you said something that I wouldn't allow you to pull the effigy down. And do you recall that I was behind the tree, and when you would pull it down, I would pull it back up? Do you recall that?
I know we were struggling over the effigy. I know you.
I mean, you were struggling with the effigy, but all I was doing was trying to exercise my constitutional rights to burn this effigy. Is that right? Well, is that right?
I don't recall that.
No,
sir.
And at what point did you stop trying to pull the effigy out of the tree?
When I saw that it was cabled.
Surely. And how long would you say that the fire lasted?
10 minutes, perhaps.
10 minutes?
A little more, a little less.
You sure it wasn't like maybe 10 seconds or so?
No, because I remember asking for a fire extinguisher. They had a look. They didn't have one. Then I told them to notify the fire department. And while we were waiting for the fire department, Mr. Greathouse turned on the sprinklers. That took time.
Sure. Well, just after that, when I advised you that I felt we were exercising our constitutional rights and you were interfering with it, and you, at that point, you quit attempting to put the fire out or even pull the effigy down, and of course it went up in flames. Do you recall at that point where I was standing?
When I stopped trying to pull the effigy down, you were in the process of being arrested.
do you recall, Officer Sergeant McKay, that you, in fact, came from the front of the effigy and you came around the back and grabbed me here on the shirt and toward my throat? Do you recall that you did that?
No, sir, I did not do that.
Do you recall observing the officers and their behavior or how they were treating me?
I saw part of it, yes, sir.
And do you recall that at least 4 officers came over, and because I had my hand on the wire and pulling the effigy up, they came over and they pushed me?
No, sir, I did not.
Another one started pulling on me. And pretty soon they were saying, "Get down." They were trying to throw me on my face in the ground. Do you recall that?
No, sir.
Well, I'm frankly amazed that you don't recall all of that, having been right on the day of the series. At what point was I put under arrest, and whose decision was that of the 5 police officers that were pulling and jerking me around?
It was my decision
It was
to
your
have you
decision.
placed under arrest.
And in relationship to the whole incident, which lasted, you're saying 10 minutes, but it was probably less than 5 minutes that this all took place, correct?
He's supposed to be asking questions, not instructing the witness as to what happened.
That's cross-examination.
But he does need to ask in the form of a question, rather than give the version of it.
I'm going to ask you the question again. Do you gave the order for the arrest?
Yes, sir.
And at that point that you gave the order for the arrest, do you recall that I told you all that you didn't have to jerk me around, that if I'm under arrest, and do you recall that I put my hands behind my back so they would stop jerking me around?
I don't recall that, sir, no.
And I was handcuffed. But you do recall my arms were behind my back and handcuffed.
Ultimately, yes, they placed your hands behind your back.
And at that point, was I resisting arrest, or was I trying to protect my life?
You were placed under arrest. You struggled with the officers initially. Once you were handcuffed, your struggle ceased.
All right, we're going to take a break and we'll come back with more. Stay with us. Welcome back to Court TV. I'm Carol Randolph. In October of last year, a small band of Native Americans protested the Cleveland baseball team's use of the name Indian and the team's mascot logo, Chief Wahoo. The protesters found both to be racially offensive. And during the demonstration, a stuffed effigy of Chief Wahoo was burned. That act led to the arrest of the 3 demonstrators, Vernon Bellecourt, Juan Reyna, and Juanita Helpfrey. Well, this afternoon we are covering their trial, which took place earlier this month. And as we go back into the courtroom, Cleveland Police Officer Curtis Miller is on the stand. He described how the effigy of Chief Wahoo was strung from a tree and burned.
What happened once you were out standing guard? Did anything unusual take place?
One of the protesters said it was like an Indian-like dummy.
Okay.
And he was dragging it around, and eventually he hung it from a tree.
Ken, do you recognize the individual you saw hang that dummy here in court today?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you point him out and describe what he's wearing for the court?
Okay, he has on a black leather jacket,
Okay.
black shirt.
Can you remember the record reflect he has pointed to or identified the defendant in this case, Mr. Bellecourt? Okay, what did he do once you said he was dragging the effigy or the dummy around? What did he do with this effigy?
Eventually he hung it from a tree.
Okay.
And then he proceeded to douse it with lighter fluid and set it on fire.
Okay, now did you see this take place?
Yes.
And this was the same individual he had seen dragging the effigy around?
Yes.
Okay. What happened once he had lit it on fire?
Once he lit it on fire, I was ordered to place him under arrest.
Who ordered you to place him under arrest?
Sergeant McKay.
Okay, and what was going on when she gave you this order?
There was a lot of confusion going on.
How so?
With people chanting, fire it's kind of like a panic.
How could you tell it was a panic? What made it a panic?
Just the gestures there with people moving back, moving away.
Now, when you say people, whom specifically are you referring to?
Well, we had pedestrians still coming into the game.
Okay.
And we had officers were in between them and the protesters.
So when you say there's a panic, you're referring to these pedestrians as well?
Right.
Okay. Who all was trying to douse this flame or was dealing with the fire that had started at this point?
Once the fire started, I don't know who put it out because I was dealing with Mr. Bellecourt at the time.
Okay. Now, when you approached Mr. Bellecourt, was he agreeable to you?
Objection.
You can answer.
He didn't want to be arrested.
Okay. How did he make you? How did you know that?
Oh, well, I informed him he was under arrest and attempt to put his hands behind his back, and he pulled away from me, and I was able to overcome him and put his hands behind his back and put the handcuffs on him.
Approximately how long did it take for you to overcome him and get him under control?
Objection to the characterization of the prosecutors.
Okay.
Approximately how long?
Ask the question.
I'll rephrase it. Approximately how long did it take to get him handcuffed?
20 to 30 seconds.
Okay, and what was he doing during this 20 to 30 seconds?
He was still shouting something or other.
Okay. What sort of physical movements or gestures was he making, if any?
Well, he pulled away, resist.
Okay. Once you finally did get him under control, or excuse me, once you did finally have him handcuffed, what happened next?
Then he was escorted to the basement of Jacobs Field to the security room.
Okay. Was that the end of the protesting for the evening?
No.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to be called to the scene of another protest over the course of the night?
Well, after I had him downstairs secured and we came back up, there was a sit-in demonstration on the west side of the stadium this time.
Okay.
So we were all ordered to go over there.
Okay, and what did you see when you got over there?
We had individuals that were sitting on the ground and refusing to move.
Okay. Did you have any conversations personally with these people?
No.
Okay, did you notice anyone else, without getting into the specifics of the conversations, having conversations with these individuals?
I believe I've seen Sergeant McKay and Sergeant Gonzalez ordering them to disperse.
Okay. Did they disperse upon this conversation taking place?
No.
Okay. What happened once they refused to disperse?
We physically removed them.
Okay, and how did you go about physically removing them?
Well, me and another officer, we grabbed one gentleman under his arms and picked him up, and once we got him up, he kind of walked with us, and we escorted him to the security room.
Okay, do you recognize that individual in court
Yes.
today? Can you point him out and describe what he's wearing?
Okay, he has on a blue sweater with red and white in it, gray slacks.
Your Honor, may the record reflect he's identified the defendant Juan Reina. Did this all happen within the city of Cleveland, officer?
Yes, sir.
Next, nothing further.
All right, once again, that was one of the police officers that were there. And Michael Christian, let me ask you this, too, because another group of individuals that was in the courtroom and also there at the time are what they call peacekeepers. Tell us about who these individuals are and what their function is.
Well, we have to say, first off, that the protesters have a right to protest at Jacobs Field.
They're given 4 times, I believe.
That's been recognized. There's a federal court order that says that they have a right to protest 4 times during the course of any given month. Some months there have been no protests at all. This particular month, because of the fact that there were American League Championship playoffs and then the World Series, this was actually the 9th protest. Now, according to the court order, the protesters only have a right to be there 4 times. But the Jacobs Field personnel didn't fight it. They let them protest 9 times. This was the only night that there was any kind of incident that involved arrests. There is a group in Cleveland, a group of volunteers known as the Peacekeepers, and they show up at games when it's believed that the protesters are going to protest, Native Americans are going to protest, and their function is basically to keep the peace. So they all identify themselves. They wear, I think, T-shirts that say Peacekeepers on them, and their function basically is to keep fans and protesters away from each other, just to make sure that there's no more violence than there needs to be. I think it's been very successful. I don't think there has been a lot of fan-Indian violence. Certainly there's been some yelling back and forth, differences of opinions about this entire issue. But again, the Peacekeepers are there to keep the peace, and by and large that's been pretty successful.
Well, that's exactly what the next witness is. He's Patrick Purdy, and he's a member of the Peacekeeper organization, and here he is telling that jury what he saw that day. Let's watch.
Yes. What did you and your peacekeepers do?
We went over to the west side of the complex
Okay, by the
on
left
Ontario.
Side. You're talking about the Ontario Street side.
Correct.
Just looking over here at your map once again, we're talking this side of the ballpark. if you could see.
Right, it's the mall area.
Okay, so where these towers are?
Right,
Okay.
correct.
So you went over there. What was your purpose in going over there?
Well, there are two places that we basically have the peacekeepers. One is on the 9th Street side,
Right.
and the other is on the Ontario Street side.
Okay.
Seeing that there were no one there on 9th Street, apparently, well, I'm not sure why they weren't there.
Hold on, Mr. Pretty.
My objection was he was going into something apparently, which he had no first thing. He caught himself.
That's real good.
Well,
Continue, please continue.
I did not observe a need for peacekeepers on 9th, so we went to Ontario, which is the other area that normally they set up.
Okay, and when you got to that side of the building, were there protesters there?
Yes, there were.
Okay, and where exactly were they?
They were in the mall area where they in the past had been, where they, from my perspective, where they normally were set up in the past.
And where would that be specifically? Near the towers, away from the towers?
They were right near the towers, just a few feet going towards Ontario Street in the mall there.
Okay, about how many of them were there?
My recollection is that there were probably 10, is all I saw at that point.
Are you personally familiar with any of the protesters who are regularly there?
Some, yes.
Okay. Any of the individuals you see in court here today who you're familiar with?
Some.
Okay. By name, could you name them?
Well, I know Juan, I know Juanita.
Did you see Juan and Juanita there that night?
Yes.
Okay. And what was going on with Juan and Juanita?
Objection.
Overruled. Well, maybe you could be a little more specific.
What were Juan and Juanita doing when you saw them there?
I only saw Juanita for a brief moment. I was standing near Juan, and at that time, Sergeant Gonzalez was also there, and he turned to me and said, I'm sorry, Sergeant Gonzalez turned to me and questioned whether he should arrest them. I think specifically he said, should I arrest, they've been warned, should I arrest them now or wait 10 minutes, I believe he said.
Okay. Did you respond to that?
My response was, I think it should happen now, based on my observation that someone had started to speak on the bullhorn.
Who had the bullhorn first?
I can physically describe an African-American gentleman about 5'6" and about 165 pounds.
It's not someone you see here in court today. It's not one of the people sitting in the trial.
Oh, no, no.
Did you see when the arrest was effectuated upon Juan Reyna?
Yes.
Okay. How close were you to that arrest in terms of proximity?
Within 6 feet.
Did Mr. Reyna go agreeably? Did he struggle at all?
My observation was that Mr. Reyna sat down.
Well, Michael, you've said that protest has been going on for quite a while, the 9th one. What's at the heart of this case, and what are the penalties these defendants face?
Well, this is an interesting case, Carol, because if you talk to the two parties, it's about two completely different things. The defense in this case would like this to be a free speech issue, that this is about the right to burn an effigy. This is about free speech. This is about freedom of expression, the right to protest. The prosecution in this case says this is a case about three people who basically broke the law, broke misdemeanor laws by trespassing and aggravated disorderly conduct and so forth. These are misdemeanor charges, and there's 6 of them. Juan Reyna and Juanita Helpry are each charged with criminal trespass and with aggravated disorderly conduct. Vernon Bellecourt is charged with criminal damaging or endangering, and resisting arrest. But they're just misdemeanor charges. Each charge carries a maximum penalty of $750 and or 90 days in jail. So we're not talking about huge state felony charges here. These are misdemeanor charges. So depending on which side you're talking to, this trial's a very different thing.
And in terms of damaging property and the like, we're talking about a tree that you saw.
That's right. If you listen to the prosecution, this tree from which the Chief Wahoo effigy was hung and burned was very damaged. If you listen to the defense, it really wasn't damaged at all. It was just charred, and you could wipe the charcoal stains off. Now, I've looked at the tree, and I'm happy to report that the tree is alive and well. It seems to be budding. It seems to be fine. At the same time, the particular branch from which this effigy was hung appears to be dead. I don't think that branch is going to bloom again. It's certainly not blooming now. So I think it's fair to say that there was some damage to the tree. I think it's also fair to say that the tree will survive this.
Well, and we will survive this. We've got more of this to come. You'll be coming back to give us some final thoughts a little bit later on as we get toward the evening. Once again, a pleasure, and always looking forward to this. You stay right where you are, because we've got more of this trial, and when we come back, we'll also give you the latest legal news. Stay with us.
You're watching AIM Internet Television.